Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality factors that may be at work with the life and death of Jimi Hendrix. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. So first I'll look at the background of Jimi Hendrix, and then I'll move to the mental health and personality factors. Jimi Hendrix was born Johnny Hendrix in Seattle, Washington on November 27, 1942. He took an interest in music early on and taught himself to play the guitar at the age of 15. He formed a band shortly after this, but it only lasted about 3 months. Hendrix's mother died in 1958. She had a ruptured spleen. He was not allowed to attend the funeral. Hendrix was arrested twice for riding in stolen cars. He was given a choice between being incarcerated or joining the Army. In 1961, he enlisted in the United States Army. Hendrix had a tough time in the Army. He was distracted. They said he was a terrible shot. He was frequently caught sleeping during times when he was not supposed to sleep. In June 1962, he was given a general discharge under honorable conditions. This is quite different than an honorable discharge. There's a stigma attached to a general discharge. It means that the conduct was not really too great, right? It indicates there were some disciplinary problems. Later, Hendrix would falsely claim that he had broken his ankle during a parachute jump and received a medical discharge. Hendrix continued to play the guitar in various places. A month after he was discharged from the Army, he was in Clarksville, Tennessee. He stopped for a drink in a small club and spent almost $400 on alcohol. By 1967, he was using amphetamines, cocaine, LSD, and marijuana on a regular basis. Hendrix would play with musicians like Tina Turner, Sam Cooke, and Little Richard over the next few years. After this, we see he started his own band named Jimmy James and the Blue Flames. He signed an agreement with Chaz Chandler to form a new band called the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Hendrix would move to London, and this is when his name was changed from Johnny to Jimmy. In London, Hendrix was a massive success. Some people argued that he was the greatest guitarist who ever lived. He came back to the United States and built his own recording studio in New York City. In 1969, the Jimi Hendrix Experience disbanded. In August of 1969, Hendrix played at the Woodstock Music and Art Fair in a performance that became famous. The Jimi Hendrix Experience would be reformed in 1970. On September 18, 1970, Hendrix was in a hotel room in London when he was found unconscious at 11 a.m. by his girlfriend Monica Danneman. She claimed that he was breathing but unresponsive. He was taken to the hospital, but he was already dead. He was pronounced dead at 12:45 p.m. He was 27 years old. An investigation into his death concluded that he aspirated on his own vomit after taking an excessive quantity of barbiturates, specifically a sleep aid called Vesprax. Danneman claimed that Hendrix had taken 9 tablets of that medication, which was actually hers. The prescription was in her name. A typical dose was half a tablet, so Hendrix consumed 18 times the recommended dosage of that medication. There are actually a number of theories about what happened to Hendrix, including some conspiracy theories. When he was transported to the hospital, one of the physicians said that he had clearly been dead for several hours. Danneman claimed that Hendrix was alive at 10 a.m. Danneman lived until 1996. She spoke several times about the death of Hendrix. Her story has changed many times. One element that really stands out is the time that she said that she woke up. In some accounts, she said it was 7 a.m. Other accounts say between 8 and 9 a.m. We see 10 a.m., 10:20 a.m., and then of course we see 11 a.m., which is the most famous version of her story. The paramedics said that when they arrived at 11:27 a.m., Hendrix was fully clothed and clearly dead. They said no one else was in the hotel room. It seems fairly clear that Danneman lied or had a really poor memory, but every version of her story is consistent with Hendrix dying from barbiturate use. So I don't really see any room here for conspiracy theories. It seems pretty clear that it was only Hendrix and Dannemann who were in that hotel room prior to his death. She may not have been there when he died, but she was there sometime before that. There's really no clear motive that points to something like homicide in this case. Now moving to the mental health and personality factors. I'll start with the potential personality profile for Jimi Hendrix. I like to conceptualize personality using the 5-factor model. I remember the big 5 traits through the acronym OCEAN: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So looking at openness to experience, we see a high level with Jimi Hendrix. He was creative, intellectually curious, and adventurous. As far as conscientiousness, his level was low. He was impulsive, irresponsible, and his work ethic was repeatedly described as awful. He would miss appointments, show up late. This caused division between Hendrix and other people in the band. Now, at other times, Hendrix appeared to have a pretty good work ethic, like earlier in his career. So it may not have been that Hendrix actually had low conscientiousness. It could have been the effect of the substances. Excessive alcohol use, for example, can make somebody impulsive and make them irresponsible, even if their personality is more geared toward higher conscientiousness. So with extroversion, we see a mid-range to low level. When he was not drinking, he appeared reasonably outgoing and friendly, but he was somewhat reserved during interviews and did not appear to have too many positive emotions. We see mid-range agreeableness. He was much less agreeable when consuming alcohol, of course. Hendrix has been described as humble, which points to a higher level of agreeableness, and he's been described as antagonistic, which seems to point, of course, to a lower level. It's really tough to know because alcohol can have a sizable effect on how agreeable somebody appears. As far as the last trait, neuroticism, we see a high level here. Hendrix appeared to be angry sometimes. He appeared to be depressed and anxious as well, and he had difficulty resisting temptation. Now moving over to mental health, we see there are 2 different theories about the mental health of Jimi Hendrix. One says that he likely had substance use disorder, and the other really says the same thing, except it adds bipolar disorder. I'll talk about each of these separately. It seems fairly clear that Hendrix consumed a lot of substances, which unfortunately is not particularly unusual for famous musicians. It's not clear if he actually had substance use disorder, but again, either way, his consumption of substances was pronounced. Multiple reports indicate that Hendrix's behavior changed drastically when he would consume substances. Under the influence, he would behave in an angry, aggressive, and violent fashion. He would go into a rage, a behavior inconsistent with his personality, one that was never seen when he was sober. He was arrested in 1968 for getting into a fight in a hotel in Sweden. In 1969, in California, he attacked a friend of his, but no charges were filed. A few days after that, he struck one of his girlfriends with a bottle of vodka. Her injury required stitches. In 1969, he was arrested in Canada for the possession of substances, but he was acquitted after a jury trial. No violence was involved in that situation either way. One of the terms I've heard in reference to Jimi Hendrix a few times is a colloquial term, mean drunk. It captures this idea that somebody can have a non-violent disposition, like as far as their personality, but when they consume substances, everything changes, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So the question that comes up at this point, of course, is, does alcohol cause anger, or does it unlock suppressed anger? So does it actually make somebody aggressive, or just allow them to express the aggression they already have, but they're keeping under control? Well, of course, in the case of Jimi Hendrix specifically, there's no way to know. But in general, when looking at the research literature, we see that people who are violent when they consume substances have higher levels of suppressed anger. So alcohol disinhibits the individual. They are prone to rage, and the alcohol permits that rage to be expressed. People who have aggressive dispositions have their risk of violent behavior increased by consuming alcohol. So alcohol really doesn't cause violence. Rather, it unlocks aggressive desires that have been kept in check. This brings me to the second theory, which is that Hendrix could have had bipolar disorder. Now, bipolar disorder is characterized by both manic and depressive episodes, although technically only mania is required for a diagnosis of bipolar 1. During episodes of mania, a person will be energetic, goal-directed, euphoric, and irritable. They can get in a lot of trouble during this type of episode. We see gambling, consuming substances, promiscuous sexual activity, and overspending are common behaviors. Episodes of depression are characterized by extreme sadness, feelings of low self-worth, sleeping too much or too little, and not getting pleasure out of life. So with this in mind, why do some people believe that Jimi Hendrix had bipolar disorder? Well, there are really only 3 arguments to support this theory. I'll go through each one. He wrote a song titled Manic Depression. Bipolar disorder used to be called manic depression. He was creative, and he often appeared depressed and had mood swings. For example, during one interview, he said that he had 3 nervous breakdowns during the time he was in the music business. Looking at these arguments, I don't think we can really make a strong case here for bipolar disorder. Again, as far as I know, he was never diagnosed with the disorder. Of course, that doesn't mean he did not have it, but it certainly doesn't point toward the idea that he did have it. The song Manic Depression did not really connect to bipolar disorder other than the title and when the term was actually used in the song. As far as the creativity, this hasn't really been closely linked to bipolar disorder. I did a video on this subject a while back. Any connection that is there is far too weak to support the idea that creativity is some type of symptom of bipolar disorder. Hendrix did appear depressed, and he may have had mood swings, but those could be completely explained through his substance use. The difficulty with substances, as I talked about before, is that until somebody stops using them, it's very hard to know what else is going on with that person. If Hendrix stopped using, all the symptoms could have disappeared. The term nervous breakdown could mean almost anything, but it's more likely to point to something like adjustment disorder as opposed to a major mood disorder like bipolar disorder. So is bipolar disorder a possibility with Jimi Hendrix? Sure, anything's possible, but I don't see convincing evidence that Hendrix had bipolar disorder. Because Hendrix died at the age of 27, he joined the so-called 27 Club, which really refers to a group of musicians who all died at 27 years of age. There are many people in this category. The most well-known, in addition to Hendrix, would be Brian Jones, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, and Amy Winehouse. One of the symptoms that Hendrix appeared to have was insomnia. This is a symptom that appears among many celebrities who have died young, directly or indirectly, due to substance use. For example, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, Heath Ledger, and Michael Jackson. The substances could have caused the insomnia, but regardless of the cause, the way these celebrities went about addressing the problem worsened their situation. Substances never make things better. I never got the impression from looking at the material available on Jimi Hendrix that he lost control due to fame. It's theorized that that's what happened with some of those other individuals. Like this idea that he was fine, then became famous, and just did whatever he wanted to, creating a path of destruction. We see some of that with somebody like Jim Morrison and, to some extent, Brian Jones, but that doesn't really fit with the behavior of Jimi Hendrix. I think it's more likely that the fame and all the new relationships and stressors that resulted created a lot of pressure, and the money that Jimi Hendrix was earning allowed him to attempt to self-medicate with substances. Essentially, fame gave him the freedom to harm himself in an attempt to shield himself from the consequences of fame. A vicious cycle we have seen repeated far too many times. So those are my thoughts on Jimi Hendrix. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.